What if we could turn you into an investing terminator? What would we program you with? Hello, I'm Douglas Dow, and I'll be running through a quick presentation tonight on the OODA loop and how it can impact your investing. And really, what we'd like to do tonight is really consider what is the number one factor preventing you or permitting you to get investing success. We have met the enemy, and he is us. That's the case, right? It is the behavioral mindset. And so tonight, what I'd like to do is discuss the OODA loop, which is the detailed OODA loop here tonight is observe, orient, decide, act. And note, you can constantly run through this as you're moving through your investment portfolio and even strategic decisions in your life. Any and all decision making could be run through this actually. And to give a little bit of background about the OODA loop, there was a fighter pilot by the name of John Boy, who basically was like really well known for being able to beat people in literally 40 seconds. And essentially, he kind of like, well, why am I really good at this, and how am I able to do it? And he really said, well, let me break it down into components, and formulated this formula to say, well, this is really something I can also teach. And so it did become the basis of even the Marine Corps maneuver manual. Just as a trivia note, but I figure if it's good enough for the Marines, it's good enough for us to use in investing. Let's go ahead and move to the observe category. This is essentially the circumstances, information, and guidance. And then we move to an orient, which is biases, culture, upbringing, and emotions. The decision, actually decision point, and then of course the action. We will be, of course, focusing most on observe and orient tonight in terms of the investment decision. Before we do that, though, I would like to talk a little bit about the conscious level and the unconscious level as a human. The conscious level, we delete, distort, and generalize information, so we can first make that observation. The second one, and maybe more important, and just even generally, until you make the unconscious the conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Let me read that again, just so it sinks in a little harder. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This Carl Jung quote is basically sums up what really we can focus on. If we're not getting results in life we want, or are needing to improve our performance, this is a good focusing point to allow us to say, well, am I getting what I want? And if you're not, especially, I really highly encourage you to consider that maybe there's stuff below the surface that needs to be dealt with. And we can also observe that a lot of the click word responses that Cialdini talks about in his book Influence are down on this level. We don't think about them at all. It's just click word. It's just automatic, and so it's at the subconscious level. Which is okay. This is part of human nature. Quite okay that we can't make all of the decisions all the time. So there needs to be automatic behavior for sure. But if we're getting a lot of results we don't want, this is where we can consider things like affirmations and meditation to over time reprogram the subconscious mind and change our outcomes. The basically the core thesis is this is malleable, but most people don't review this stuff and don't look at it. So if you've got the life you want, you're sitting on a beach with Mai Tai right now, and you're not even really that concerned about a silly podcast about OODA loops anyway. But if you're like me and would like to continue to get better results from life, this is a good place to look in terms of, well, at what level do I need to change? And I'll skip to cognitive biases here. This is the really first kind of delving into like some of the things that are going along at either the conscious level, deleting or distorting, or even some kind of the interaction between the subconscious and conscious level. These are cognitive biases that have been observed that are very common amongst people that they do. Like anchoring is a good example. Anchoring, for example, is over reliance on the first piece of data that you have. And you're like, well, I really read this book, and that one book was really great, so you over rely on that particular data point. Another great one is the confirmation bias. I actually think confirmation bias should be toward the tops of, in terms of decision making, one of the worst ones that we have to look out for. Because what confirmation bias is essentially doing, it's basically any new data that comes in. Once you formulate a decision, any new data gets rejected, even if it might be correct, but because you've already made a decision on what you think should happen or it should be like, or you made your choice or how life should be, then you're not accepting new data, and so it's a very challenging data point to deal with. There's also the overconfidence bias. Sometimes we're overconfident in our abilities. I can't say I resemble that remark at all. Anyway, other ones that are common, the survivorship biases just means, for instance, when you think it's easy because we haven't heard about the people that have failed, you only see the successes, so you're like, oh, it can't be that hard. It's just the survivors are doing great, so you don't hear about the maybe the thousands of others that failed at it. So that's a prime example of survivorship bias. And just FYI, this is probably my personal one that's not really talked about, but I really think there's a bias in this, that we assume linearity in a nonlinear world and talk about a bad bias to have, because data points that any given moment, the models are interesting. A linear model is interesting and maybe informative, but we live in a nonlinear world. So I think we have to really consider that this is a real point of consideration that we have to look out for. All right. We're going on to, this is the codex. This is a very interesting combination of all the different biases that they've identified. So this is really a deep dive. I'll recommend you check out on Wikipedia on confirmation bias. It's really fascinating to look at. It is a deep dive though, so we'll take some time to really consider how deep into the weeds you want to get with that. But I'm just wanted to overview. Man, we have a lot of biases as a human, and just wanted to bring that point out. Tonight, I'd like to share with you a little bit about, this is just an interesting thing to think of in terms of information and, again, biases. There is the efficient market hypothesis that says at any given moment, when all the information is available, then the price is fairly valued. So essentially, we know this isn't always true, right? You've got GameStop, you've got Tesla, you've got things that are ridiculously valued compared to their actual results. So you have to consider that this is another source of information. It's like, well, wait a minute. This information's out here and all this information's here, and yet the stock price is way down here. It's like, well, wait a minute. That stock is way undervalued, and those are great opportunities when you can tell that the narrative about a particular stock, and it also works in real estate too. They're like right now, office is very badly maligned, and people for good reason, right? There's a lot of data to say that office is a terrible investment. However, there are certain pockets like suburban A class office space might be really good, and then you add the term medical office, and then it's like, well, that might be a completely different animal. So really consider the words and how you respond to the words, and consider the narrative. The narrative might be violated. Also can think in terms of retail. When you say retail, you might think of an empty dead mall, when if you have a neighborhood retail strip center, it might do quite well, especially in suburban markets. The next big concept I wanted to introduce tonight is asymmetric risk. One of the coolest concepts, if you can integrate asymmetric risk into your world, you can really change how you're calculating things and really update your OODA loops to say, well, is my risk asymmetric here? And so when you're asking, do I have asymmetric risk, and you don't know, that's a sign. Well, I need to know more about my risks. Then, if I don't know what my risks are, then that's a first sign. Okay, I need more data. Secondly, if the risk is not asymmetric, then you can say, well, wait a minute. Why should I do this? If I'm just taking a fair amount of risk, but the reward's not very much, then also maybe if it's around a push, then why should we do it? We should wait for better opportunity, maybe. And so that's another thing to consider in terms of asymmetry. And then I will say, the personal favorite one is when you can get it to positive asymmetric risk, small risk for big rewards. You see a neighborhood gentrifying, for example. You see that neighborhood is like, oh, that neighborhood's changing right now, and I've got this little parcel of land over here I can buy, and I think the chances are really great if I build a mixed use retail with multifamily on it, that it's going to do really well. The risk asymmetry there might be really great because you already have some data to say, well, wait a minute, that neighbor is changing, and if you get the right timing, you can have an asymmetry going. So again, it's really just a good filter to say, well, is my risk asymmetric here? And I'm a huge proponent of asking that question. Real quick, I want to introduce the Kelly criterion. This is a really fascinating area that I'd like to know more about myself, even personally. This is a favorite of Edward Thorpe, who created, was in the movie, was the basis of the movie 21. I don't know if you've seen it with Kevin Spacey, but essentially, he decided, he got really fascinated. Well, how do you beat blackjack at a casino? And really got into the weeds about that. And then he started to say, notice and observe that your bet size can mean everything to you. So if you have a good, positive, effective growth rate, then your bet size should be at the optimal growth rate. There's a kind of an optimal point where your bet needs to coincide with your long-term growth rate. And so if you over leverage your bet, not leverage, not the right word. If you go too far on your bet, you actually, even though your odds might sound great, you can oversize your bet, and that can be problematic because you're taking on too much risk relative to the growth rate that you're dealing with, or the positive upside. So, and again, this is just another way to look at asymmetric risk. So, guys, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of the OODA loop and introduce a couple of filters that you can add into, both from the cognitive bias side, and then introducing the asymmetry idea. So when you're doing your observe and orient in terms of making an investment, you can really consider, okay, well, what am I thinking on this? What is my emotional response? So that really matters in this space as well. We try to tend to think of, at least I did before I got into behavioral economics. I used to think, well, it's just a math problem, and really, it's not a math problem at all by itself. Much like most things, that they are deceptively mathematical, when in a sense, most of the time, there's a fair amount of emotions that we have to contend with. And so, what this tool will hopefully empower you with is a tool that you'll have available to you to let's think in terms of, well, how am I emotionally responding to this, and throw that into the loop, and allow you to think about a checklist, even saying, well, let's consider all these other factors. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, guys. I just wanted to delve deep into this a little bit, and provide this information, and see what you think. Thank you for taking the time to join me.